Hey guys, Chris here with Cohesive Friendship Unit. We're going to be talking a little bit about Zelda. I've been doing a little bit of thinking, seeing some more videos about what the next game might possibly be. And I had some ideas, so I thought we would definitely go over them. But real quick, if you like this video, please throw us a like. If you love us, sub us. That sub will enter you for a chance to win some Steam codes. You can see more about that down on our channel page. And please let me know in the comments what you think of this. Let me know kind of where you think the next Zelda might be taking place. And yeah, I think we're ready to go. So basically, here's my kind of like hypothesis. Here's the theory that this is all built on. Uh, if we're gonna look at the 3D Zelda games, and if you look at them, games that take place in Hyrule never follow a game that doesn't take place in, or it never follows a game that takes place in Hyrule again. And if it does, that Hyrule is warped beyond belief. It's a new Hyrule essentially. It's a new world under the guise of Hyrule. So let's kind of start and we'll walk through that. So we have Ocarina of Time first, obviously, as the first 3D Zelda game, and that takes place in Hyrule. Uh, but after that, we go to Majora's Mask, which obviously takes place in Termina. And then after that again, we have The Wind Waker, which takes place in the Great Sea, which I'm not considering Hyrule. It is Hyrule, but it's so warped, and ultimately it becomes New Hyrule, but that's semantics, basically. Then we shift into our next Hyrule game, which is Twilight Princess. And that's something that's kind of interesting to note, which is another thing I want to point out. The difference between 1998 to 2006 is that's 8 years between games that actually take place in Hyrule, which is a lot. So then from Twilight Princess, we go to Skyward Sword, which I'm gonna kind of book in with the Wind Waker, where it is Hyrule. I get it, but it's not Hyrule yet. It's not even, it's called the Surface until the very end of the game, where it's implied that it becomes Hyrule. But the point is, it's not Hyrule. They departed, and then we got Breath of the Wild, which is in Hyrule. So this is kind of interesting because it seems that if a game takes place in Hyrule, we never go back to Hyrule immediately after, and there seems to be a huge gap in years between visitations to Hyrule. And what I mean by that is between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess was 8 years, and between Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild was 9 years. So it seems like it takes the better part of a decade to come back to Hyrule, which for those kind of two reasons, one being hasn't been nearly north of 5 years yet, and it seems that there's a pretty clear pattern, and this makes sense. They don't want to just keep throwing it to Hyrule. It's because they tend to recreate it every time, and it would be weird if they recreated the world every 3 years. I think it works, but it seems that there's a clear pattern. And then that kind of got me thinking, okay, so where maybe could we possibly go? And the last thing that I want to point out before we dive into this, of where the next place could possibly be, is it should be noted that Zelda games rarely sequelize in new locations, and if they do, they're typically spin-offs, and they typically happen in immediate succession, which would basically disqualify all these places. So what I mean by that is we went from the Wind Waker, and then we had the two spin-off DS games, and those took place in New Hyrule, but they were kind of immediately after, and they were spin-offs. Then I guess you could refer to the Oracle games, but I mean they kind of came out at the same time, but that's still kind of another example of really just kind of being their own thing. So the other thing I want to point out is basically it's weird to hop back to an old Link, which would be the most sense to go back to these places. So like if you were to go back to Termina, would you bring a new Link to Termina, or would we go back to young Link? So that that exception would have to occur, or we'd have to see like a new Link brought to these familiar places. With that being said, let's kind of go through all of the non-Hyrule or greatly warped Hyrule places and see which one might be the most likely. I'm going to start with the Great Sea, which I'm going to say is unlikely because it's been done many times. Like, we already have stories exploring those worlds, all the way up to Link driving trains, so I feel like it'd be hard to wedge yourself in. It seems like they kind of penned that off, at least for now. And it's been a lot of time since the original, but obviously all of these have had a lot of time since their original outing. The next one is, Koholint Island, which would be for Link's Awakening, and I think this is really the most unlikely because it was a one-off Game Boy game where Link was maybe dreaming the whole time, and I don't think anybody would. I think people would be hyped, like the hardcore, but I think it would be kind of a tough sell to really push. It would be sick though. The next one I would say would be the place where the Oracle games take place, but that's Capcom developed, and those ideas are like rarely borrowed. Like, the characters that were created are rarely revisited in like Nintendo developed Zelda games. So then the next, we're kind of warming up to the more likely two for me, would be Termina, which this is hard because I think a lot of people would really like to see this, but you would have to bring back young Link, which would be super hard to follow because you're basically following, you're going to make a third game of like the top two very heavily argued Zelda games ever made. Like, you're going to try to reignite that magic. But I think that would be unlikely, so I think you would have to bring in a new Link to Termina. And I think the only reason I think that this could happen is because of the sheer, like, everybody loves Majora's Mask, and especially concerning the sequel to Breath of the Wild, people have been kind of like saying, let's go back to Termina. But from like a Nintendo standpoint, not really seeing it, unfortunately. The place I do think is the most likely would be the surface from Skyward Sword. And I kind of have a few reasons for this. One, I think the Skyward Sword look actually is very good, with the exception of it being in standard def. I think the art style is like definitely there though, and I think if they HDified the engine, kind of like how they took the Wind Waker and brought it to the Wind Waker HD, if they could do a similar kind of facelift and preserve the art style, make it HD, I think the art of the game is incredibly strong, and they could revisit that world in a way that a lot of people would appreciate. Like, if they Breath of the Wildified the surface, and that would almost kind of work, especially if they're kind of keeping that like wild aspect, that could definitely work. But I think that would be a fun place to revisit, and I think that's the most likely place that we've seen that they would revisit. But honestly, the fact that this last Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, appears to have gone like totally AWOL on the timeline, I would venture to guess that the place we're going to go is going to be totally new, be it a super futuristic Hyrule or an entirely new land. But I do think that we are going to be revisiting a new place that's not Hyrule, or going to a brand new land. But that's just my idea. Let me know what you guys think down below. I hope you all had a great Christmas and some great holidays. We still have New Year's left to go. I will catch you guys next time.